behind the scenes, just seeing what's going on in the workshop. So we can talk about different jobs I'm doing, any problems I'm having, and solutions around them. So what I've been doing in the last week is getting these two bodies prepped for finishing. So this is the 485 fan fret model, and then the baritone fan fret model is hanging up to your side there. So I'm trying a new finishing technique. I've seen the videos by Ken Parker. He does a series of videos called Arch Toppery. I'll link him in the description below. Where he uses an epoxy as a kind of sealing coat. So he wipes on a very thin layer of epoxy and then does the oil finish from then onwards. The idea is supposed to seal the wood a lot better. It should help build a kind of glossier finish. And then also it might even add a little bit more kind of hardness to the material as well. So it should be a little bit more damage proof, which should be nice as well, especially on the soft tops like the redwood here and the aged cedar on the baritone model. So as I was trying to map out the location for the bridges, it dawned on me that something wasn't looking quite right, and so I did the string measurements as I showed in the week 3 video for the 485 using standard gauge strings, 53 to 12s, and found out that the measurements I was using when drawing the bridge up were wrong. There was about 5mm difference, which is quite big. So using the results from that test, I redesigned the bridge as I have it here, so it's a little bit more steeper. So I decided to just record how I made the bridge from the bridge blank to this sort of state here. I used the Shaper Origin, which is a handheld CNC machine. It maps out a polka dot tape, and then you can locate it yourself, and you can drag and drop your files that you've drawn on a computer into this machine, and it will help map out and know where the locations are. So it's really good when rapid prototyping. It's really good when I can just draw something on the computer and then send it to the machine and get a piece cut out within 20 minutes. So this bridge took me about 25 minutes to build to get to this stage. There's still more jobs to do. I still need to radius the bottom, shape the edges, and drill the string through holes at the end. But for a complex job like this with lots of strange angles and adding kind of reference points to center lines, it's invaluable for that sort of job. So I'll show you now, power of editing, how that came about. So here we have a bridge blank for the new fan fret bridge for the 485 model. So I recalculated by testing the intonation of the two, the thinner string and the thicker string, to find out the actual intonation length of each. I found that my original plan, the angle of the bridge would be too shallow, and so it would have resulted in it either being impossible or at least very difficult to intonate the strings, which is a bad thing to do. So what I have here is the Shaper Origin. It's a good bit of kit. I've been trying to use it as much as I can to try and make it pay for itself, because it was a bit of a pricey expenditure. But I used it for head veneers, making bridges, molds, fingerboards, all this sort of thing. And it's always good when you're trying to rapid prototype something. So you can just sketch it up on the computer, and in about 5 minutes you can have the piece you want cut out. So I'm just scanning the surface here now to include the workpiece. So you see that there. So this is just scanning the whole area, so it maps all the tape and the location of the piece of wood, and then once it's done, it will stitch that all together and be able to find the location of the items. As I move around now, you can see that it's now over the ebony piece, which will be the bridge, and it will kind of follow the location of that. So what I can do now is import my designs. There's an import button just at the top here, so that connects to the Wi-Fi, and then it will pull up all the different files I've got under this folder. Where are we? There we go. So now we've got the file, and it allows you to kind of drag and drop where you need it to be positioned. So I'm just going to place it on the outline I've drawn here. And then from then on it's quite simple. It's probably not very easy to see from this angle, but it's mapped out the entire plan, including all the different cutaways for the saddle and location pins, and also where the string through channels will be, along with loads of different reference lines. Because it's such a obtuse angle, it's been very hard to locate where the ball end should be, so I've had little notches that I'll cut with the engraving bit, and that should help me locate everything in the right place. So I'm starting out with a 6mm bit, so that's going to do all the rough work, cut the outside to shape. So there we have the outside has been cut, so now the piece is to shape, so remove the excess. So now we'll change to a smaller bit here somewhere, and then we can do the remainder of the cuts. So I've got a 3mm cutter there. Now when designing the diagram for the piece, it's always good to keep in mind what bits you actually have. So if you've only got kind of, say, chunkier pieces, then you won't be able to cut skinnier internal cuts. So I know I've got a 3mm, so I can kind of work my plans around that to make sure I don't have to keep chopping and changing bits too frequently. Up to our plan, make sure all the cuts are in the right orientation, because there's an inside and an outside cut these can make. You can even cut on the line of the drawing. So you just want to double check and make sure you've got everything orientated the right way, otherwise you're going to end up cutting the outside of the saddle, for example, or whatever else it may be. Got a little reference bridge I made ages ago, so I've got all the measurements I need scribbled on here. So these little slots here are only 4mm deep. So right, I'll just cut all these pieces with the 3mm out, and then I'll swap to the engraving bit and I'll show you what I do with that. So there we have it. Hopefully you can see that all the saddle has been cut, the reference holes at either side of the saddle, which I use to locate the bridge when I'm gluing, and then the 6 exits for the strings to come through. So I'll have to drill the ball end access on this side, and I do that by hand. Might be a bit tricky because of the strange angles. There's not really a flat surface to reference off, but this is where the next step comes in, where I add little reference notches. So I'll add notches along the edge here, including a center one, top and bottom, and then references against here as well, which correlate to the center of this string path. And then once I've done that, that should help me a lot in finding out where everything is supposed to go and where all the holes are supposed to be drilled. Another thing we're going to do with this piece as well, so this is the engraving bits, so it's just a fine point. What we'll also do with this bit is just chamfer around the edges of the string axis around here, so that'll just clean off these ovals and make it a little bit neater as well. So there we have it. We now have, let's get you in focus here. So each of these openings has now got a chamfer using that angled engraving cutter, and you can also see here there's little notches for, let me get the pencil mark out of the way, little notches for all the center lines of each of the pieces. Oop. So now these along here will help me reference in line with the ones I've got up the top here. You can see that one more clearly. So then I can draw a line straight through each of these string openings, and then reference on here where the ball ends are supposed to go for the strings to run through straight and clean. And then another key step, once you've got the bridge made, I always add these 2 reference holes which are inside the saddle. So I use them to use pins. I use drill bits to help locate onto the guitar, and then once I know the location of it, I can mask it off correctly for the finishing process. And then also when it comes to clamping the bridge on after it's been finished, there's a lot less chance of it sliding around, moving on you, which is an absolute nightmare when you're trying to glue the bridge on, and all of a sudden it's like trying to glue two ice cubes together. So having the pins is an absolute lifesaver. So I'll kind of just walk through now the sort of process I use to make sure I get the bridge in the right place before drilling the guide holes into the top of the guitar. Okay, so here we have the Simca Redwood Indian Rosewood band fret 485 we're making, and here is the bridge just built on the Shaper Origin over there. So what I've got here is markings based on the location of the fingerboard, where the outside of the fingerboard is, where the centerline is in relation to the fingerboard, and then using my measurements that I made. Let's have a look here. Yes, when I was testing the intonation length with the string and the technique I showed in the last video last week, this is what is the approximate angle of the strings in order to get good intonation. Now with this saddle I've made it 6mm wide, so there's extra play, so if anything does go strangely awry, it should be able to be compensated back into place. So all I need to do is, using these little notches that I've engraved like I showed you, draw the center line down the face of the front and the back. Where's that in the reflection? There we go. Then line that up on this center line drawn here on this low tack masking tape, and then what I do is eyeball, there we go, down through these two reference holes here. So these reference holes there and there, just inside the saddle, so it shouldn't be spotted once the saddle is on. It can be used in future if you want to run a pickup as well. They'll be pre-drilled, but they are just for locating pins, because there's nothing worse when you're trying to glue a bridge and as soon as you apply pressure it starts skating and moving around the place, so they're for that reason really. So I position the center line on with the center line of my bridge, and then I just eyeball down the holes until I can get both holes sitting onto this diagonal line here. So I should be able to see that line through these holes. So where are we? There we go. So that looks about right. I will just scooch it so that the line runs a little towards the back of the holes, because normally it's going to end up needing length added to the string. It's usually it's not very common for the way I do it anyway, that I need to move the intonation towards the nut. It's usually this way, so I'll just scooch it so the line is just off center of these two reference holes, not by much, because we've got so much saddle to play with. And then that should be it. So I'm checking the center line. That's in good spots. And then I'm looking down and checking those holes there as well. So then I will just get a felt fine liner. If you use pencil you can end up kind of indenting into the soundboard, especially when it's soft like redwood or cedar, so a fine liner pen works just fine. I haven't quite got enough tape in order to draw around the whole bridge, but this should be enough to help me keep an eye on its location. So now that's in place, what I want to do is get a long ruler and just make sure that the strings will be running where I want them to. So I still want to have good clearance along the edge of the fingerboard. Let me just scooch the camera up a little bit here. So I've referenced where the string should be at the nut in from the edge of the fingerboard, and then I just want to run down without moving the bridge all over the place to the center of those marks, and just make sure I've got enough space. If I at this point spot that there is too much excess on one side or another, then I can just tease the bridge one way or another just to balance it all out. There's a lot of obviously there's a lot of measurements involved, but sometimes you just need to get down with your own eyes and see how it's all going to fit together. So I think I can just tease the bridge over towards the base side a little. I think that will give me a good result there. So just this little smidge should all it needs, just ever so slightly off my previous center line. And then of course one last time checking with the measurements you made, just to see if it's all going to sit. As long as that measurement sits within your saddle, we should be golden. So I'm looking for 638 on the treble side, which it does, and then I want 668 on the bass side, which it does. So I might actually scooch this just a smidge back. There we go, just to make sure. So now we should have everything where it needs to be. Again, once more check. It's always best to check a couple of times if you make any adjustments, just to make sure you haven't missed anything or not taken something into account when it comes to the positioning of all these things. This is the most important thing to get in the right place. For example, if it was too far towards the treble side, then the strings may run off the end of the fingerboard. You might not have enough fret clearance to make good contact, or vice versa. Or if you have the bridge any more of a tilt, then you could lose the intonation, or it could make it harder to intonate once you've got all the strings in place. So now I'm happy with its location. I think it will do just fine sitting just there. So now all I have to do is get my drill with a 3mm bit, which will be the same size as the reference holes. There we go. Now what you can do at this stage is get one of your pins. I've just used these cheap little drill bits. So I can poke that in the hole, and that will hold that secure, and then I don't need to worry about that too much, and I can move over to the other side and drill that hole out as well. So there we have it. Now I know the location of my bridge. I can now move on to sanding the whole guitar, and then just before I apply the finish, I can mask off this area, undercut it so there's a little bit of a lip, and then I know that I won't get any finish onto the area where the glue is going to be for this bridge, because you want a nice clean contact surface, and the less material, less finish you have to remove, the easier the job will be. So that'll be the next step. The bridge is nowhere near finished yet, obviously. You need to radius the bum of it so it fits more comfortably on here, because it's still got a bit of a rock due to the curve of the soundboard. And then I'm going to chamfer the wings to remove a lot of the weight and move excess material. Drill in these ball end holes and then give it a good polish and clean so it's ready to go. So now I can remove all these reference bits, don't need them anymore, and then I will still know that my bridge can fit exactly where I need it to. And then once I do come to glue it, it won't be moving anywhere. It knows exactly where it is. Well, I hope you found that useful. So now you can see how I design the bridges up to these stages and build these bridges up to these stages, and how I locate it onto the soundboard. So now this guitar needs to go through a very rigorous set of sanding. So I'm going to sand up to 1200 grit, just like it is in the Ken Parker Art Stoppery videos. Like I said, link in the description below. And then I've done a few test samples of the epoxy just to make sure I don't go completely off piste here and make a big mistake. But they should go on just fine. So you basically apply a very, very thin layer and wipe off as much as you can. And then once that's cured, after about a day, you can then begin to put the oil finish on. He uses True Oil. I'm going to use Osmo Hard Wax Oil, and hopefully we should get very similar results. So yes, the next time you see me, both these guitars should be well underway in the finishing process. I've just got to sand this all up to 1200 grit. And then from that point on, it's a pretty painless finale. So once the finish is on, the bridge gets glued on, and the day after, once you let the glue cure properly, we can start stringing it up and doing a setup process. I normally like to leave the guitars about a week under string tension before doing any final adjustments, but you should be able to get a good idea of the kind of sound it will have and the character it will have. So that's always a very exciting stage as well. Well, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next week. Oh, like and subscribe and all that crap. And then if you have any questions regarding guitar making, anything I do, anything you're having trouble with yourself, just pop them in the comments below, and I should be able to answer those sorts of questions in future videos, which would be good. So sure, pop your questions and queries in the comments below, and I'll see you next week.